Okay, we are the 5th of Tammuz and the 10th, I believe, of July.
I don't know. Okay.
I don't know. I lost
I
track.
don't have this link. It doesn't show me.
Doesn't show you.
No,
it should be on the screen.
11th.
Oh, it's okay. So it's the 11th of July officially, and we're in chapter 6 of Shorish Mitzvot Tefillah and Derech Mitzvosecha. ומכל מקום, מובן היטב גם כן איך שהוא יתברך מצד עצמתו ממש, אין שום שם שיורה עליו. But it's important to stress, and it's understood clearly, that no name really pertains to God. To God's very self, atzmus, which I speak about many times, there's no word in English for it, but it means the thing in and of itself. I always mention there was a word in Greek, that we didn't invent it, and it was lost in English for some reason. It never made it through.
Atzmus?
Yeah.
You mean that's not a Hebrew shresh?
Etzim means is a bone.
Yeah.
But there is an etzim which is the self. But that's a later development.
Oh, really?
It's not. It's not like.
Is not. Okay, I got you.
And to say atzmus, that conjugation, that I believe is from the.
Foreign, yeah.
Not foreign, but it's a much later. It's the Middle Ages, I think. I'm not sure though exactly when it was derived, but it's not in the Tanakh. So there's no name that can describe that, because the name is supposed to be some kind of reference to something, and you can't refer to God's essence in and of itself, because it can't be captured in any letter or any measure. As all the Kabbalists agree. In other words, what the Kabbalists did is they added another intermediate stage between God and the world. The whole thing of the Sfirot, as we saw, names appear in the Bible, obviously. The idea of Sfirot is something that was later. Now, is it really later or not? We don't know, because it appears in the Bible already. Right? We have in Divrei Hayamim, in the Chronicles, that David blesses the people and says, Lecha Hashem HaGdula, to you, God, is the greatness, Ve'agvura, and might, Ve'atiferet, and he goes through this.
Those are actually right.
Those are the names of the Sfirot. Right. Plus the fact that God had connotations. Even Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu, he meets Hashem and he hears the 13 measures. They're called measures, Midot HaRachamim, measures of compassion. So there was definitely a level of connotation and names. And sort of the Kabbalists fit in the middle this thing called Sfirot. And again, the Sfirot is everything we've discussed in the previous classes. But even when you say that the names are the closest to, and they refer to God's very essence, now he gives us the caveat, which is that no name can describe God himself. Even Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, even Tetragrammaton, is not a name that refers to God himself. It's already a revelation. So in Kabbalah it'll be associated with compassion, but it's not just that. We'll see. That there's much more to say. It can be described as a process of creation, many things. But in the end, it is still not a reference to. Well, you could use it as a reference, but it doesn't describe God's very essence. That nothing can do. ואף על פי שאמרנו שאדרבה צריך לידע איך שהשמות הנ"ל מורים על עצמותו ולא על המידות לבד. And even though we said that we need to know, meaning be conscious of, that the names that we use are not referring to the Sphira, but rather they are referring to God himself, הרי הוא כאילו מתפלל לקל שאינו אלוקה כלל. Sorry, I skipped 3 words. והמכוון לשנמות הנ"ל על המידות בעצמן, הרי כאילו מתפלל לקל שאינו אלוקה כלל. And if a person says that these names refer to the measures, meaning to the Sfirot, so then it's as if he's not praying to God at all. Because God is then just a conglomerate, a bouquet of some kind of collage. Sometimes he's this, sometimes And that becomes very, very similar to polytheism.
Yes, yes.
So you have to be very careful, because in the end, even the names, you want them to refer to God himself, who is undivided, who is one. Okay? But as we explained, אבל העניין כדבראשית, שהרי נדבר שהשמות מורים על מידות פרטיים שהם כל בחסד והוא יתברך לה בכל מידות יהיו כלל. So again, the names refer indeed to God, and they are associated with a particular sphera, because the sphera is how it appears. This particular power appears in our world, and the parable that we gave yesterday about the electricity, the grid, and then the appliances that you have at home. So in the end, it's the appliance that you're interacting with. You never interact with the power inside the outlet, and so on. But he himself, as it says in Tikkunei Zohar in the introduction, in the Patach Eliyahu, lav mikol einun midot iu klal. He is not of any of these measures. Meaning, don't associate him, don't think that this measure is in any way God himself. Im ken, אי אפשר שיהיה לו יתברך ממש שם פרטי. Therefore, God cannot have a individual name, a personal name. אלא דהיינו דווקא... He wants to learn.
He doesn't want to go. He's learning.
אם כן, אי אפשר שיהיה לו יתברך שם פרטי, אלא דהיינו דווקא מצד מהותו ועצמתו, טרם שמתלבש בספירותיו. And this, of course, applies to God before he encloses himself within the Sfirot. But once he encloses himself within the Sfirot, then we do give him names, and we give each Sfira a name, and so on. אבל כשמתלבש בספירותיו על ידי שמצמצם אורו הגדול יתברך להתלבש בספירה חסד וגבורה, שנמצא בהתלבשו בהן קנה לו שם ותואר פרטי, כגון so, but the moment that he's enclosed within the Sfira, he acquires a name. It's like an acquisition. And I imagine that there's a lot to say about this word, why he uses acquire, like you purchase something. Something becomes yours. But I didn't read anything about it so far, so let's continue. So for instance, when he enclosed himself within chesed, he is called a chassid, chasdan, that he does loving kindness. Uvit lapshot mimdat gvura, when he goes into gvura, then he's a warrior, a gibor, v'dayan, and he is a judge. Hagam she'ein na'asa bo yitbarach shinui be'emet, even though he himself is not changed at all. And like we said, the electricity or the water inside the vessel is no different because it's now the outlet has a vacuum cleaner connected to it. It's still the same electricity. That, because I understand a little bit about electricity, is not entirely true. Not entirely true. Because it does change the whole grid. It's negligible, so we don't care. But if suddenly everybody turns off their electricity, the whole power, the power plant will fall. Like the power. If everybody at one moment decides to turn off the electricity in a certain area, the power grid will fall. Because it's not built without consideration of what's on the other side.
I understand.
And you can't. There's no way to balance the load independently of the users. You just can't do it.
There's an interest,
because they're one circuit in the end.
Yes.
So they take into account. So there's a lot of in the power plant where they make the electricity. There's a lot of circuits there whose job is to somehow balance it.
Redundancy.
Not just redundancy, just to make sure that that it doesn't suddenly there's no sudden fall in usage. So even if there is like a significant decrease in the amount of electricity being taken by the consumers, the utility company has a way to ensure that that same amount of current is still being taken for a few seconds to allow the system to... They can't, otherwise it will crash. So it's not entirely true that it doesn't change. It does change. I mean, when I plug a vacuum cleaner in and I make it does do something, and if a lot of people do it, it makes a lot more. But here there's no change at all. It doesn't matter how big the world is, it doesn't matter how many people are using the midah of chesed, loving kindness. There's no effect back on God, which is not the case, for instance, when we talk about the soul and the body. The soul, even though the soul is also without name, many of the things that we say here, we also say about the soul. I have a name, my name is Moshe, but my soul doesn't have a name. The soul is beyond the name. It's not. It can't be referred to even. In that sense, it's very similar, but the soul is made in such a way. This is one of the differences between a soul and God, is that the soul is affected by life in the body, whereas God is not affected by being in the Sfirot. That's one of the key differences. So I am built in...
Would there be an aspect of the soul that is not affected?
No. Everything in the soul is affected. But there is a part of the soul that remains with God.
That's what I'm saying.
Right.
So that
But then it's a whole question about what do you mean, so why is it part of my soul? We call that a soul root. So it would be...
I hear it. Yeah.
The whole idea being that I have an aspect of myself, this part that doesn't have a name, which is rooted in the divine, but it's still always connected. It's the reason I say that it's rooted in the divine is that even though it is affected by what happens, it is clean. It's clean of it. It's affected in the sense that it knows about it, but it's not necessarily changing because of it. Okay? It knows, but it's not changing. And the rest of my soul is changing because of my conduct in life.
yes, but
Everything
that,
lower.
That
And
aspect.
that aspect which is unchanging,
Yes.
but knows, meaning it's relevant to me. If it didn't know about me, that would
Yes,
be...
yeah.
That is the source of all healing. Because when I connect back to that,
You get
there's
that.
always purity, even in every person, no matter how much trauma they've been through, or what they've been through in life, how much they've been affected, there is that root from which everything can regrow. Everything can doesn't mean that the body will necessarily
regenerate.
heal,
Yes.
because the body is much more difficult to
Yeah,
regenerate,
yeah.
but the soul can. Everything that's psychological, that's not physical, can regenerate and can rebuild. But the most important part is, we always say, it's not so much whether everything else will heal, as much as that I have faith in life. And faith in life comes from that soul root. Okay, these are important things, but let's get back to here so we can try to move forward. הגם שאין נעשה בו יתברך שינוי באמת, חס וחלילה להיות במיעוט פרטי, אלא שנראה כאילו הוא כן מצד פעולתו. And again he says there's no change in God himself to make him particularly chesed or gvura. He doesn't change in that way, even though it seems to us that way, because now he's acting this way. It looks to us that he's revealing. Moshe Katuv Pardes, as the Ramak wrote, and here he finally brings the parable that we've been talking about all along. ממשל המים שבזכוכית שהגוון נעשה בהם כפי הזכוכית. His mashal, the parable from I told you from the Pardes, that there's water in a glass, and the tint, the color of the water is given to it by the glass, but there's no change in the water itself. And here it says it's in Gate 4, chapter 4 in the Pardes. אז מצד תואר זה אנו קוראים לו יתברך ממש, שנראה בו יתברך התואר הנ"ל. So these adjectives is the wrong word, predicates is what they use in philosophical language. These predicates, which are really adjectives, which are descriptions, are what we encounter. And that is what the Kabbalists mean when they say light. When they say light, they mean predicates. And in Hebrew, the word for predicate, to'ar means a predicate, it's an adjective. The technical word in Hebrew is to'ar Hashem. That's an adjective. The word to'ar itself comes from the word or. So it's really it's a later development of the word or, light. And so when we say that God has this light, has that light, what we mean to say is predicating himself, meaning he's revealing himself in this and that way. That's why every time I say infinite light, or light of the infinite, I always translate it as the revelation of the infinite, because people think light is some kind of, it comes out of the sun. By the way, it's not a bad example, because the big parable that's used in Hasidic thought, that the Alter Rebbe develops a lot, and was actually in the Tanya in the last few days, is the parable of the sun and its rays, which we saw also is it comes from the Talmud, with the story with Rabban Gamliel and the heretic, or the apostate, or I said it was a Christian, and that there's a reason for it, who challenges him to how many shchinas do you have, right? And we saw that the light comes in from many, many windows. It's still the same light. It's not coming from a different source, and all that. Which is, by the way, that's the problem with Christianity. They left too early, meaning they I don't know if they left. We sort of kicked them out. But when the severing between Judaism and Christianity happened, they were lost in their ability to deal with how to properly define the different things in their Bible. This thing called Holy Spirit, or to say someone is the Son of God, all these things. Their language was not developed enough yet, because for some reason, even in Judaism, we weren't talking about it openly. We were talking about it in very subtle parables. And either they weren't there, or they missed it, or they didn't understand it, whatever it was. It took time to develop this language. And so they sort of got lost in their words, and cornered into believing that somehow something is separate from God and is godly itself. But it's one of these issues that if they would study Kabbalah today, they would fix it. They would come to their senses and see that it's a mistake. It's not a mystery. It's a mistake, right? ואין השם לעתור ולעמידה אלא לא יתברך מצד קנייתו תואר זה. So here's the word kinyan again. He says these predicates, he acquires them. Meaning, and here's I think the understanding of why this is an acquisition. It's when you acquire something, it becomes yours, but you weren't born with it. In other words, it's not native. It's something that you've added to yourself. So these predicates that God encloses himself in, and now he's a chesed, now he's gvura, these are like, again, doesn't mean it's really outside of him, but we treat it like an acquisition, like it's something that he has purchased, and he's, in a way, added on to himself. It's not, because if something happens to my car, nothing happens to me. That's what we're trying to say. I may be affected emotionally, so that in that way, there is some effect, but it's not lingering. If it does, there's something wrong. You have to fit. Something's wrong with the person. Okay, but we have to end here. So, God willing, we'll continue tomorrow. So we're in the middle of chapter 6.